Today is January 9th, 2025, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin. Every Thursday morning, Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. Before we get to what is one of my favorite parts of the webinar each week, announcing the running total of just how much people have contributed to food banks in honor of our great speakers, I must just note that I'm in Los Angeles, as is Jean Lawler, where we're in the middle of devastating wildfires. And our prayers and thoughts go deeply, deeply to everyone who is affected, not only people who have lost there are people who've lost their lives, there are people who've lost tremendous property, their homes, and all of physical nature that is dear to them. Our hearts go out to them, our prayers are with them. We pray for a quick end to the wildfires and the devastation and recovery, physically, materially, spiritually, for everyone who is affected. With that said, let's return to the business at hand. We don't charge for these webinars. We do ask people to contribute to food banks if they like what they see. And it is always heartening to hear just how much our generous audiences have contributed so far since we began this series almost 5 years ago. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
With pleasure, thank you. The number today to start the new year is an amazing number. We've been told of donations to food banks around the world in the amount of $672,328.52, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. If you did make a year-end contribution, or you're totaling up your contributions when you're getting your taxes ready or whatever and haven't told us about it, we would love it if you would please tell us so we can add it to that running total. Thank you so much. It makes such a difference in the world, and you make such a difference.
Indeed. Thank you, Jean. And today we have a terrific program to kick off the year, a conversation with Tony Piazza. He's one of the world's foremost mediators, a pioneering force in the development of mediated negotiations. Since 1980, Mr. Piazza has transformed the landscape of conflict resolution in complex civil disputes, guiding more than 4,000 cases to successful resolution. His expertise has been sought by some of the world's largest companies, most renowned business leaders, and top law firms. Known for his groundbreaking approach, about which we will learn more this morning, Mr. Piazza routinely resolves even the most high-stakes, multifaceted cases in a single day, with individual settlements reaching as high as $1 billion. Today, Mr. Piazza will share insights from his career and the techniques that have enabled him to achieve swift and effective resolutions. From navigating intensely complex disputes to closing time-sensitive business deals and international negotiations, Mr. Piazza's unique, results-driven approach serves as a model for mediators worldwide. Tony Piazza, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're in a position to do so. And then the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. It is a privilege to have this time with you all. Tremendous sadness for the suffering that so many people are going through. As to the food bank, I think I had indicated the Maui Food Bank, which is still busily feeding people who were displaced by the fires that we had here. But at this point, anything, anywhere, the globe seems to be in an exceptional state of turmoil. So anything, anywhere people choose to do, I consider that a blessing, and I'm grateful. Beyond that, it is my fond hope that this morning is going to be a conversation rather than a monologue. I know myself to be an incredibly boring public speaker. That is no false modesty. I can get any number of people to attest to that. On the other hand, I rarely have the opportunity, and I look forward to it so much, to actually be in dialogue with someone like Jeff. And so, Jeff, I was kind of hoping that you were going to start the ball rolling more with questions or thoughts.
Sure.
During the course of the day, I wouldn't be listening, or of course they are, I wouldn't be listening to just my own voice, but more of a conversation with you.
That's great, Tony. Happy to do it. So, in all honesty, we don't know each other that well. So I'd like to start the conversation with a question that in another part of my life I used quite often with people I did not know quite as well as I would like them to. What's your sign?
Reformed or recovering Aries, I'd like to think.
When's your birthday, Tony?
4/4/51.
4/4/51.
At an earlier stage of my life, people never had to ask me my sign. They just said Aries.
So I'm curious to know, Tony. So you're born in 1951, so you are 73 years old.
Your math is precise.
Well, I just added a few years to my own birthday to do it. So I'd like to go back to the beginning and talk about when you were a kid and
Whoa.
the family in which you grew up and how conflicts arose and were resolved. Uh,
Well,
when
I won't tarry there too long. A Sicilian family in a Sicilian enclave in Lawrence, Massachusetts, a mill town north of Boston. How conflicts were resolved within my family
Yeah.
wasn't such a big deal. How some of my family members resolve conflicts outside the family, let's just say that I've been pioneering less violent conflict resolution in my career.
And how has that impacted you as you've looked for means of less violent conflict resolution?
You know, I wish I could, even looking back, find some discernible path. But I think the truth lies closer to I've just kind of stumbled my way into doing what has proven to be my life's work. I mean, this really is, I don't want to sound too new agey, my dharma. It's my purpose. And God give me the breath. I'm going to do it for another 45 years. But in terms of getting here, it was happenstance. I worked for 5 years as a practicing litigator. I did not particularly love it, and it was not certainly bringing out the best in my personality. I was already hyper aggressive and hyper rational, and it was just trending in a direction where I decided that soon I wasn't even going to be able to tolerate myself, let alone my long-suffering friends and family. So I took a break, took a little sabbatical. At the time, I was teaching Aikido, a Japanese martial art, and I thought it was a good time to kind of go to the source and immerse myself in it, and I did. When I came back, I just had the good fortune or predestination, you can pick, to run into a woman named Barbara Phillips, who at that point had been practicing law as a litigator for about 24 years. She had, I don't know how, somehow come up with the idea that the waste inherent in our litigation system could be mitigated to some degree by adapting mediation into the process of settlement negotiations, something that at that point simply hadn't been done in civil litigation. Mediation was being used in like neighborhood type disputes, in organized labor management contract negotiations. But in terms of mediating cases, as we now experience in civil litigation, it just wasn't. So the first task was to kind of cobble together a version of mediation that would be sufficiently time efficient and focused that we could, A, induce people to try something that was novel, and then B, demonstrate results, immediately. And we really didn't have a clue how to do that. So we just tried trial and error with the emphasis on error for some time. And eventually we came up with an approach which is essentially the same thing I do now. The difference is that now I actually have a little understanding of what's important about it and why it works, as compared to just having done it and kind of said, hot damn, that worked. I'm shocked.
What is important about it, and why does it work, and how can the rest of us learn it?
Excellent questions. Can I preface it by saying that I am here this morning in the hope as much of learning as sharing anything. So I'll tell you my take on it. without any pretension or presumption that it's actually an accurate description of what's going on or why it's going on. It's as simple for me as recognizing and then responding to the recognition that the process that we've adopted for the resolution of civil disputes through litigation is tremendously burdened by reactivity. And as a process for getting a third-party decision, that reactivity can be useful. It's kind of a Galilean construct of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And by, throwing ourselves at each other and our respective experts, and it does have the effect of kind of threshing through, not particularly pleasantly and not always economically efficiently, but threshing through the factual and legal issues to the point where a judge or juror could conceivably grasp them and then apply the law to them and give an adjudicated result. So I by no means mean to criticize our system by describing it as extraordinarily reactive. The problem is that that system was incepted at a time when the majority of disputes actually went through to that designed result of a third-party decision in a trial. And as we all know, that has long since ceased to be the case. At this point, although different experts vary, the consensus is that somewhere between, 10%, 5%, 1% of cases that are sent into that system end up reaching the designed result of an adjudication. The rest end up getting settled, but they end up getting settled heavily burdened by the process of negotiations occurring in that kind of reactive environment. So the simple, I believe that's a truth, the simple truth that I've received is that part of my job, as I understand it, is to redirect that dialectic into a dialogue. And I wish I were wise and good enough, perceptive enough to figure out how to do that so that the dialogue happens between the parties at the mediation. And if any of you know how to do that, would you please conduct a seminar and let me attend? Because that would be truly a higher calling. And I think the world suffers from the want of skills in that area. I accept a more modest goal of trying to incept a dialogue in the mediation between each party and the mediator. So basically what I'm doing is taking a situation where the parties have been throwing themselves at each other in a dialectic as advocates and redirect it between party A and the mediator into a dialogue, and between party B and the mediator into a dialogue, and depending on the case, party C, D, E, F, so that there can be a less reactive, more objective evaluation of what the risk profile is in continuing this litigation process through trial, appeals, to some final adjudicatory result, and what the realistic options might be for settlement. And if one can do that, and you're working with reasonably intelligent people who are at least motivated enough to explore settlement that they've gone to the step of setting aside a day and retaining someone's services to help, then usually you can get it resolved, because you've got these people now as rational actors, less burdened by reactivity, looking somewhat more realistically at their risks on the path that they're on, and somewhat more open-mindedly at what the options may be for a negotiated resolution. And usually they'll pick, you know, the more, the less onerous, more rational option. If that sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, that's pretty much everything I've learned that is crucially important in 45 years of mediation.
So let's pull back the curtain on it. Tell us a little more about what does a mediation with Tony Piazza look like, if you can generalize, or perhaps you can't generalize.
Actually, no, I can't generalize because it's precisely the same format and really the same process that I started doing 45 years ago. We start out, well, let me take a half step back. People contact us. They say, okay, want a date, find a date for them. And up to that point, there's no visibility to me. We advise them that usually people will want to submit briefs, and invariably the parties do. We counsel them to try to keep the brief down to 10 pages. And surprisingly, generally, actually, the lawyers will do that. But lawyers being lawyers, they will often append some exhibits to it. And the stack of stuff that I end up getting can be measured in inches, sometimes feet, and on rare occasion in yards. Now, part of my job, as I understand it, is to actually wrap my brain around all that stuff to the point that I can point out to seasoned litigators who have sometimes been enmeshed in it for years, things that they're missing occasionally in their own data set. Now, that may sound like a daunting task, and it's a conversation for another day, how to rapidly process that kind of a volume of information, and be able to synthesize it sufficiently that you can have a reasoned dialogue with people who are experts in a one-day setting. But it's not a skill of mine. It is another facet of how you can approach things in a non-reactive way. And forgive me, I don't mean to be teasing on that, but that really is a conversation for another day. We don't have the time for it today. So I get the briefs, I wrap my brain around it, and we have everybody either, it used in the good old days, used to be sitting in the same literal room. These days, occasionally, it's in a virtual room. Everybody is present, and everybody can be half a dozen people, 40 people, whoever is critical to the decision-making process for settlement, either because they're percipient witnesses about something, or they're decision makers, or they're experts. They're all in the pool for the joint session. And I walk in and say, good morning. Thank you all for making time to be here. I'm going to take just a moment of your time to review how we usually proceed. Please tell me if that seems appropriate. And the purpose is simply to get everybody to buy in right from the beginning. Okay, yes, this is a process. We're here to participate. And the way you're about to describe to us, we listen to it. And yes, that is what we are blessing. That's what we are here to do. And then I explain we're going to have a brief joint session. The purpose is to give each side an opportunity to explain in a summary fashion how they see their position, that it's not like putting on a case in arbitration or in court, educating me about the underlying facts, and hopefully clarifying for each other why they're seeing their position as they do. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. I don't get to sit in on other people's mediations, so anything that I think I know about how the field is practicing mediation is hearsay. And since I had the blessing of having Irving Younger as my evidence professor, to this day, I'm still keenly aware of the hazards of relying upon hearsay. But what I hear is that joint sessions have fallen out of favor, and that the majority of mediators simply don't conduct a joint session. I wouldn't begin to know how to mediate without a joint session, because to me, it serves two critical functions. First, the litigation process is so reactive that in my experience, even for a case that has been grinding through litigation for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, the joint session is often the first time that critical decision makers on one or both sides have actually heard and understood where the other side is coming from. Now, that should beggar the imagination. And yet, I'm here to tell you, I hear that literally directly from decision makers. Oh, I didn't know that's, what the focus was. And that's how powerful reactivity is. When we're so, I've kind of had two parallel lives professionally. I've been a martial arts teacher since 1975. I graduated from law school in 74, and I've been mediating now for 45 years. Although I know how deadly dangerous it is in a martial arts context, and although I've really schooled myself to try not to do it, in that instant when we're counterpunching, we're not hearing, we're not seeing, and we certainly don't have a 180 perspective on what's going on. So a critical function of the joint session for me is to at least start by having each side hear where the other side is coming from. I don't aspire to agreement in a joint session, but at least cognition, at least understanding. I'll even strike understanding, at least hearing what the other side is saying. And ironically, when that happens in the joint session in a mediation I conduct, is not when the other side is speaking. Because when the other side is speaking, quelle surprise, everybody, including the decision makers on the other side, are saying, counterpunching in their mind. Oh, that guy's a jerk, that's bullshit. I then summarize back each presentation. And let's say it's a complicated case and the presentation goes on for over an hour. I'll summarize it back in about 5 minutes and not miss any of the salient points and not put a spin on it and try to make it nice, so that the person who made the presentation at the end of my summation back will usually say, oh, yeah, that's what I was trying to say, a little more concisely. So two things are happening, ideally and critically. One, the people on the other side, while they were so busy counterpunching while the presentation was being made by their opponents, were actually listening with rapt attention to what I, as the mediator, was taking away from the other side's position. And that's when, usually for the first time, the decision maker is actually hearing the other side's position. It's ironic, but there it is. The second thing is, the way I practice, once we go into caucus, I'm going to be asking a lot from people, including being willing to listen with an open mind and heart to my input in terms of what their risk profile looks like, which is usually very, very different than they came in thinking. That's asking a lot of people. At a minimum, I should have established credibility. Let them understand that I've actually taken the time in advance to really wrap my brain around their briefing. And the only way you can summarize back cogently an hour presentation in 5 minutes and not miss any critical point and not spin anything is if you've already done your homework as well as listening attentively. So when you can summarize back in a way that people say, yeah, that, by gosh, that's it. When you go into caucus now, you have a basis for a dialogue. You're still asking a lot of people, but hopefully you're not asking too much for them to listen with an open mind to your input, if for no other reason, because you've clarified for them that, hey, next stop on the train eventually is going to be having someone else in the role of judge or juror tell you how it looks to them. So at least it should be informative to hear, this is how it looks to me. So I start off with a joint session. I think it's critical to do that. Other people feel differently. Probably some of the people listening today feel differently about it. And I'd love to hear how, without doing that, you can pull it off, because I'd rather be more efficient. And there's no question there are risks in doing a joint session when people are already pretty emotional. You know, things can get a little bit hot, and I recognize that. I just think that those two functions are such a critical predicate for having an evaluative dialogue in caucus that that's what I always do. Now, when I say always, I can count on the fingers of both hands the number of times where I've succumbed to the entreaty by parties. No, look, can we please admit the joint session in this case? I guarantee you we'll blow it out the door if we have a joint. Usually I tell people, no, and we're just going to weather it, and we do. But on, I don't know, half dozen times, I've said, okay, invariably, we've started out 20 yards behind the goal line. And sometimes we've been able to pull it off despite that, but it has been a huge burden to omit the joint session. So part of what I'm looking for today is to hear from someone how you can still get a result and omit the joint session so I could be more efficient and hopefully have it be a more pleasant experience for people. As I sit here today, 45 years down the road, that's what I do. I then go into caucus, and in caucus, I'm trying to accomplish three things. First, make sure that I have heard everything that might be relevant, because even when people have submitted a chunky brief, I often find they have things on their mind that is useful for me to hear, if for no other reason, to comfort them and make sure that I have heard them. So step number one, I walk into caucus is, oh, okay, this is the less formal part of the process. What more would it be useful for me to have in my mind so that I can work with you effectively today? And then I listen. I want to put an asterisk after I listen, because I'm also here today at the start of a new year to confess my sins and try to be a better man in the coming year. And so listening has actually not been one of my strong suits over the years, and I'm committed this year to really listen more and more deeply. But I do my best to listen to their input, check in, say, okay, is there anything else? No. And then second thing to accomplish in caucus, say, well, would you like to hear how this looks from the outside in terms of the risks? And then I give it to them. And I'll put a second asterisk there about how I deliver that. And then third, it's our opportunity to begin to evaluate what the options might be for resolution without anyone feeling like they're bidding against themselves. And I will put a third and critical asterisk there. Now, Jeff, really, I am committed to not having this become a monologue. So I'm going to pause there and just summarize. Start off with a joint session, go into caucus, continue the caucusing process until we've reached terms that both sides feel they can live with. Hopefully, and usually that's at the end of the day. On occasion, I will be in hot pursuit over the next few days or sometimes even weeks. And my own practice is, if that seems prudent, it's necessary, then I'll donate my time to do that. So I don't charge follow-up. We charge one ridiculously exorbitant fee for everything. To receive the briefing, assimilate it, conduct a day of mediation. And if people reserve 2 days, we charge them the same ridiculous exorbitant fee for each day, in an effort to try to get people to not reserve more than 1 day and just really come committed to getting it done. I say semi-facetiously that negotiations, like any other gaseous matter, will expand to fill whatever container is made available to them. So we really do try to get people to get it down to 1 day. So I'm going to pause now at this point. I realize I have some asterisks that are hanging out there, but I would love either your thoughts or anyone else's thoughts or questions at this point.
Well, tell us more about your preparation process.
Hmm.
Do you talk to the lawyers before they come in? Do they come in cold? How do you,
Cool.
cold.
Now, occasionally people will plead with my case manager. No, really, look, I need a quick conversation with Tony in advance. But this is now, I wouldn't say it's just preference. I can give you a rationale for it, but it may be I'm rationalizing something that is just, something I like to do or avoid doing. I think there's a virtue to coming in and having both sides know that I am not pre-colored by any dialogue with people in terms of my views of the case or the possibilities for resolution. I think that's a real asset, and therefore I forfeit the clear possible benefits of having prefatory conversations with one or more counsel in advance.
About the aspect of the mediation, Tony, of helping lawyers deal with unrealistic expectations on part of clients, high emotionality on the part of clients. I find that I learn about that when I have the pre-mediation calls with the lawyers, and I find that it equips me better to deal with that aspect if I know about more, have more detail about it in advance. How do you view that as part of your mediation mission, and what techniques do you apply to deal with those challenges?
Especially in lieu of taking advantage of the more direct route of having those kind of conversations in advance with counsel. Yeah, it is absolutely critical that you help to buttress counsel's, I don't like the phrase client control, client relations, client communication. Absolutely a critical role as I see it. And basically, I do it during the process as best as I can. It is clearly, makes sense to do it, by those kind of conversations in advance and come in with a heads up. It's one more thing. It's one more way you can be sensitive to these things during the process. I simply give priority to coming in. And here we're starting to tread into less tangible kind of factors. To the extent that I come in with any kind of preconceptions, even perfectly accurate, presumptively useful preconceptions about what people are thinking, where they're coming from, to that extent, I am standing separate from that person or those persons. And my frontal brain, which is like all of ours, designed to be figuring all this stuff out, is busily at work. And I am then increasing the separation between me and them. And it's ironic. With the best of will, the more I am standing separate from people, and between me and them are preconceptions about who they are, what they're thinking, what their sensitivities are, you name it. To that extent, I am increasing that, forgive me, all please, karmic illusion of separation, which is what bedevils us in all of our efforts to communicate in any context. And therefore, I don't do it, Jeff. And I can clearly see the virtues of doing it. And by it, I mean, prep myself in advance, allow counsel to prep me in advance. I just don't do it. I walk in and I say, good morning. And as best as I can, I open up my mind and heart, and I try to just be there with people moment by moment. And no question, my frontal brain is busily at work, despite that, thinking about all of these things and trying to analyze it. And it should do that. That's what it's there for. But I also try to keep letting go of the separation rather than doing anything that might augment it.
And
Was
yet,
I responsible?
yes, and yet when you wrap your brain around the case, as you talked about doing, reading all the briefs, immersing yourself in the facts of the law, are you not inevitably forming preconception?
Absolutely.
This one's a good lawyer. Why is
This
this
guy's a jerk.
driving?
That's a bullshit argument. Ooh, that's going to be a problem for them. Absolutely. That's what our frontal brains are designed to do. And then when I walk into the mediation, all of that stuff, like a helium balloon that a kid is holding, watching a parade, and then just forgets it. I keep trying to let it go. And my frontal brain will say, "But tap me on the shoulder, but Tone, don't you remember?" And I try to let it go. And I try to let it go. It's like my clumsy version of meditation. You know, you can't keep thoughts from coming in. You can't keep your frontal brain from grinding over thoughts. You can allow your awareness to not be focused on that process. So that process goes on, but it isn't commanding all of me.
Tony,
And I
let's
apologize if
go.
that starts to sound a little new agey. Uh, this is the same guy who, you know, walks into these disputes involving astronomical sums of money with the movers and shakers, the masters of the universe who are used to telling people what to do, and has a day. So I'm extremely pragmatic. This, to my mind, is a critical, tangible reality. The extent to which I am standing separate from people with whom I'm trying to establish a meaningful evaluative dialogue, to precisely that extent, I am increasing the burden of reactivity. Because when Newton observed that every action elicits an equal and opposite reaction, it was unqualified. It wasn't, well, every poorly executed action or every ill-intentioned action. Every action, when you're dealing with a dualistic model, elicits a reaction. And these folks are already so burdened by reactivity for having been on the cusp of or enmeshed in an adversarial process that part of my job is to drain as much of that away as possible, and therefore doing anything that increases the separation, I think, has to yield whatever it might add to the process. I wish I could say that in a way that sounded simpler and less abstract, but that's if there's anything that's the core of what I've learned in doing my work, and if there's any explanation how, despite my manifold shortcomings as a person or intellectually or anything else, I've managed to actually help people get to resolutions, that's it.
So it seems to be a curious balancing between this idea of eliminating separation and being, in a sense, intimate with people. And at the same time, a certain point, the mediation has to get down to the brass tacks of how many dollars or what kind of
Yep.
injunction or
Yep.
whatever. So
Yep.
tell us about the journey of the day or the process to those points.
Well, I'll pick up a couple of my asterisks in the process
Please,
of
please.
back in the day, what I used to do while I was diligently trying to wrap my brain around all the briefing was come up with a list of like 20, 30 points that I thought, you know, we'd have to address in the mediation. And then I'd walk in, and did I mention that listening has not been one of my strong suits historically? I'd say, okay, so now, and I'd march them through all of these issues. And again, quelle surprise, there'd be a lot of head bumping with counsel in that process, because here I am challenging them, as it were, in front of their clients and pointing out the weaknesses in their case. And you would think it should have been screamingly obvious that that was of limited utility. But again, since I'm here to confess, and that's what I used to do in my callow youth. My callow youth being defined as up until like the past few years. Now, what I try to do more is I'll walk in and in the initial caucus, after I've listened, say, okay, so would you like to hear what the risks look like? And there'll usually be one, maybe two, maybe three really critical fulcrum issues that the litigation is going to turn on. And I'll just tell people straight from the heart, okay, this is how it looks on that. And what happens now, almost invariably, instead of that vigorous debating that used to go on, people will say, yeah, okay, we get it. Maybe we don't quite weight it as strongly as you just articulated it, but yeah, we get it. And it's actually interesting to hear, how you weight it. The opening caucuses have been transformed of late. It's into one where basically we just kind of get down to it. So part of the response to your question is, at some point you have to kind of get down to it. Well, part of the it is getting down to an appreciation, a shared appreciation of what the risks profile looks like, taking it through to a final adjudication. The other part of the it, of course, is identifying what the realistic options are for settlement. And here, again, I'll pick up another asterisk. What I hear is that whether it is only thing that mediators do, or at least primarily what they do, is conveying offers and demands between the parties. I don't do that. I mean that literally. Not only do I not elicit offers and demands, I usually will discourage communicating offers and demands. Because again, what is an offer or a demand? Can I just keep a running tab on apologizing for sounding too ethereal about this?
We will simply, as lawyers, I used to say, we will simply deem the objection to be standing to all.
Thank you. So you all have a standing objection to, where is this guy coming from? I got it. An offer or demand assumes that you have two opposing parties. Duh. And if you are conveying offers and demands, what is that Robert Frost poem? The bearer of evil tidings, when he was halfway there, remember that evil tidings are a dangerous thing to bear. I'm sorry. You cannot help but start getting into more reactivity. And the kind of cases I work on, I mean, literally, people come in sometime and they're billions of dollars apart. Can you appreciate how quickly it would devolve into a cruel charade if I walked into the plaintiffs and said, okay, all right, so your demand is 1.4 billion, but hey, we got to get the ball rolling today. So why don't you give me a more reasonable position that I can take in there? And they say, okay, Tone, you're such a nice guy, 1.2. And the other side has been saying it's worth dinner and a movie. I walk in and say, oh, okay, look, I know that's still like way too high, but we got to show them there's some movement here. So give me some kind of, I'm not trying to parody it, but can you see how offers and demands can give you maybe the impression of movement, but there's also a reality that it's like if you try to take two powerful opposing magnets and push them together, with enough effort, you can start getting the impression that you're getting them, but you're really just increasing the level of resistance and reactivity in doing so. So I don't convey offers and demands, which should birth the question, oh, really? Well, how do you figure out where this can resolve? And the completely unsatisfying answer I have is, it's a continuing evaluative dialogue. I keep talking with people about what the realm of the possible might be in terms of different options for settlement and where within dollars, it looks like it might come together. And people, say, oh, no, and you continue the dialogue up to the point where in dialogue with party A, I have a sense of really what they might be willing to live with at the end of the day. And through my dialogue with party B, a sense of what they might be willing to live with and which of the various options actually makes the most sense. And I will then put in a seed crystal of a mediator's proposal. I'll say, okay, look, you're going to hate this, but the nice part of it is, A, you're not going to take any risk of bidding against yourself. I'm going to make a proposal as mediator. You're going to tell me yes or no. If you say yes, the other side says no. I'm going to say convincingly that both sides said no. No one's going to leave here with any de facto floor or ceiling on any future negotiations. So it's perfectly safe. And although you probably are not going to like it, it's not going to be an iterative process. I'm not going to stair step you. In fact, I'm going to disable myself from ever having the possibility of stair stepping you because it's going to be binary, by which I mean it's going to be yes or no, not no, but. And therefore, if it's going to be a hard decision for you, you don't have to worry that you're going to make that hard decision. And then I'm going to come in and ask you to make another hard decision. So I continue the dialogue up to the point where it's clear that if this one is going to settle, let's just assume it's only going to be dollars. Simplify it down. It's going to be at X. And then I'll make a mediator's proposal for X and let both sides think about it and respond. And if both sides say yes, I say, oh, thank you, God. And we get it done. And if either side says no, I say, okay, we're done. Now I'm going to put an asterisk on that one. For a proposal to have any efficacy, when it's something that presumptively people are going to hate because it's so different from what they came in wanting and feeling they deserved, you can't have an iterative process because people are going to say no and see if they can get something that they hate less. So I have to communicate that a mediator's proposal once made is binary and final. And so if people say no, sometimes that's the end of it. Done. Other times it's the end of that option. So for example, and this is just as an example, not something I would do as a matter of course. Let's say people came in and they were literally $1 billion apart. And at the end of the day, they were a mere $50 million apart. Now, as a small town Lawrence kid, that still seems like an appreciable amount of money to me, but compared to where they came in and what their transactional costs are going to be if they stay, on the litigation route and what their risks are, it isn't necessarily a reason to quit. So sometimes at that point, I'll say, okay, look, it's clear that among the plethora of issues that you've been fighting about and that you'll have to continue to fight about in court, there's really one issue of fact or law that is really driving your disparate settlement positions. Let's have a retired judge that you both have confidence in have a one-day hearing on just that issue. And either in an advisory or dispositive fashion, they're going to render an opinion. In other words, I will try to get people to appreciate what it is that are now keeping them from yes, and figure out whether there is an alternative route that is more cost efficient and less risky than having the whole mess continue to some distant after appeal Supreme Court decision on the case, and instead do something in the next 30, 60, 90 days that's going to tie it all up. I think I might have wandered a little far afield from your question there, and I noticed that we are rapidly running out of time. By the way, it is a hard stop at the top of the hour, right?
For us too, yes.
No, I didn't mean for me. I meant for you.
Oh,
And
yes, for our, this is not like Joe Rogan where we go on for three hours at a time.
super duper. So we've got 9 minutes, and again, this is still sounding an awful lot like a monologue. What can we do to converse?
Let me ask you this: if what do you see as your legacy? What do you see as the impact that you, looking at the mature age at which you find yourself, what's your legacy on the mediation profession, on the world, on
That I've failed,
anything at all?
that I've failed utterly to demonstrate that every dispute, since what I mentioned about reactivity and Newton is physics, and physics is agnostic in terms of context. Every dispute is burdened by and to some extent rendered self-perpetuating by reactivity. Punch, counterpunch, punch, counterpunch, and soon the whole world has a black eye to mangle a saying. And I know in my heart, and of course it's not so naive as to think that some of the conflicts out there that are being measured in their consequences by blood are going to be susceptible to a one-day process resolution. But all of them are burdened by reactivity in the efforts that people are putting into trying to resolve them. And when diplomacy devolves into carrying positions back and forth and saying, oh, come on, we got to it's the same phenomena. So I know in my heart that some of the disputes out there that are impacting the well-being of people to a far greater degree than the economics of litigation also could be ameliorated, not magically solved, by coming into them as a third party with that perspective and some kind of a process that helps to mitigate the degree of reactivity. I've done nothing material in terms of demonstrating that. I've offered to donate my time in some contexts, and people have said, oh, tell them that's so sweet. Thanks. Yeah, we'll get back to you. And so I would like to actually make a plea to everybody who's listening right now. If, for whatever reason, you have, through your good offices, the possibility of getting disputants to the table, and it can be the virtual table of Zoom, in some dispute that is impacting the public well-being, by whatever definition you have of the public well-being, pick up the phone and please call me, and I will cheerfully donate a day, and we can co-mediate it together. Because the heavy lifting that I've been unable to accomplish is getting people in those contexts to agree to sit down and spend a day. You pull that off through your good offices, and I will cheerfully donate my time to spend a day with you, and we can test drive and try to demonstrate that this process, this understanding of the mediation process, can actually have a broader applicability than I've been able to demonstrate thus far. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make that entreaty.
You're welcome.
Now we have about 6 minutes.
So, Tony, we have in our mediations a bunch of lawyers, and they have ethical obligations to be vigorous advocates for their clients. And you do your listening and the evaluative dialogue, and you come in with a mediator's proposal. And a client, you leave the room, client turns to lawyer, says to the lawyer, how do you know that's the best? How do you know that's the best we can do? You haven't laid eyes on the other side for several hours now. This guy picked a number out of his ear or some other aperture, and you know,
You've nailed it. You've
and
nailed it,
Tony,
brother.
good old Tony, he probably picked, we're the nice guys here, we're the reasonable ones.
Right. So he's
Probably
taking the path
pounded
of
it.
lesser
He
resistance.
probably tilted against.
Jeff, you can stop only because you've nailed it and we are running out of minutes.
Go
Yeah.
for it.
That is asking a hell of a lot from people. And there is no amount, in my experience, of reasoned suasion that will suffice to get people over that hump. The only thing that can do it, and it isn't even, demonstration isn't even the right word, because demonstration implies something that's happening in the more apprehensible, visible sphere. What I believe gets people over that hump, when they're able to get over that hump, is that I'm actually doing what I'm asking of them, that I am actually with them. And even though I understand it's my job to get this done, and my fragile ego is saying, oh my God, Tony, you're supposed to be a good mediator, and this isn't getting, that I'm actually letting go of that as well. And I'm just being there with them with an open mind and an open heart. And see, the thing is, the illusion really is, the separation really is an illusion. It's a very persuasive illusion, but it really is an illusion. We are all connected. There's a field in which we are all connected. And when I can muster up the courage in the face of my fears and my desires to actually be there with people and not be trying to make something happen, I believe it creates a door an opportunity. You don't push people through that door, but it allows them, if they choose, to step through it and trust. And I see that trust get demonstrated, and you've nailed it. It's a huge amount of trust in the face of completely rational fears. These are not irrational fears. And it routinely, to a greater or lesser degree, it happens. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Could I steal half of one with the poem? This is by a follower of a Sufi master. Awakening from this dream of separation, I find I've misplaced my most precious fears. Reaching for them, I touch instead your smile in my heart. Some boundary has been passed, and there is no longer space enough to collide. Feeling your love within me, it is natural at last to love myself. Now, if I could only ever really get that, I'd actually be a pretty good mediator. And I'm just kind of hoping that God might give me the grace of another 45 years, and maybe I'll somehow, smooth out some of the rough edges and get to that place. But that's the place that I aspire to. Okay, got the last couple of minutes, all yours.
Well, Tony, we began with talking about the family in which you grew up, and the poem was beautiful. Thank you. I ask a lot of mediators this. Let me ask you as well. Tell us a little about the family in which you find yourself now, and do these techniques work at home?
Don't do this at home, folks. The day has passed, fortunately, where I ever caused my wife to say, "Are you mediating upon me?" No, I am now blessed enough. Well, I'm here in Maui. Duh. Kid from Lawrence has somehow managed to stumble his way to Maui. So that's kind of part of my sense of home. And then I try these days to not limit my sense of family to the ones who are most immediately related by blood or near and dear to me, and just kind of let that separation go. And even the kind of quirky members of my global family that test my patience sometime, I just try to be with them as family as well. Well, it has been a privilege and a pleasure having this time with you. I'm waiting for my phone to ring from someone who says, "Actually,
Yes.
I've got this." And I hope that our paths cross actually rather than just virtually someday.
The pleasure and the privilege are entirely ours, Tony. I think this has been an extraordinarily candid and intimate conversation, just the kind that I was hoping that we would have. I think that the recording of this will be listened to for many years, and will help to, I hope, cement your legacy as one of the true icons in the world of mediation and a role model for all of us. I know
My
that
gratitude to Natalie, Jean, and yourself is immense for creating this forum. You're doing God's work, and I thank you so much for it. Take care.
Thank you. I know many people will be contributing to the Maui Food Bank in your honor. I know I will.
Again,
thank you so much.
Whatever food bank you think, wherever you are, or anything else that you think is going to do good, I am so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we are complete.